Okay, so we're here with ACAB Radio, which stands for All Canaries Are Bilingual. And we have a special guest, which Nisa Sun, who you might have seen on our third show. She's from Forced Trajectory Project and Families United for Justice. ForcedTrajectory.com is the website for Forced Trajectory Project. FU4J, that is the number 4, .org is the website for Families United for Justice. And ACAB Radio is a collaboration between Nevada Cop Block, which is nvcopblock.org, and Food Not Bombs Las Vegas, which is foodnotbombslasvegas.org. Oh yeah, and
awesome.
So we have King Ron, Jay Lifer, and my rap name is Special K. So, one of the things we wanted to talk about, we did our May Day show last week, and during that time we had some families at May Day spoke about the impact that the police had on them after their family members had been victims of police violence. And we had Dominic Archibald, whose son was killed by it was the Sacramento police, right?
San Bernardino,
yeah,
Bernardino Sheriff's Department.
Yeah. Right, in Barstow, so it wouldn't be Sacramento. But sorry about that. So she did a pretty good speech. I wasn't familiar with the case before that, but it really showed the ridiculousness of that case, in that her son, much like Tashii Farmer Brown, had not been accused of any crime, was not committing a crime, and was not suspected of a crime, but a police officer wanted to detain him and started chasing him and eventually shot him. So I don't know if you want to say some details on that.
From what I know of the case, he was being apprehended by an officer. It's called a consensual stop, which means that as a citizen you have the right to walk away at any point. And since Nathaniel wasn't aware of that, the officer took advantage of his, not knowing, and basically started, poking around and asking for ID, asking where you're going. He was not suspected of a crime or committing any crime, so there was no reason for him to even have to show his ID or anything like that.
And that's something that the cops do all the time. And that's one of the reasons that we say to ask, am I being detained? Because basically the cops will imply that you have to answer those questions, and
unless you're
that
detained.
You have to be detained. So if you ask them, then they have to tell you that you're not being detained. And
at which time you're free to walk away if you want.
And you really should.
Yeah.
Right. But it also shows one of those examples where they were free to go and they tried to go, but the police chased them and ended up murdering them.
Murdered.
Which is, once again, the same thing as Tashii Brown's situation.
So Dominic Archibald gave a great speech at May Day. If you're interested in watching it, Kelly wrote up a good article on nvcopblock.org where there's a link to the YouTube video for that. It was a great speech. Nisa also gave an amazing speech. So yeah, check it out. There's also more information on that whole case on the website.
Also, I wrote an article on forcedtrajectory.com as well, and it has Dominic's speech on there.
Yeah, it has the YouTube video of the entire speech, and like I said, it's a good speech.
It's well worth watching.
And one of the other things, is Jorge Martinez is
Jorge.
Lopez's dad, right? Her stepfather. I had the opportunity to meet him, which is good and bad. It's good to meet people, but it's also bad that you meet them under those circumstances. But it's good that some people supported him during May Day and made him feel good. And Junior Lopez, in case you haven't followed the case or heard our last couple shows, was murdered on April 6th by Las Vegas Metro Police. It was Officer Rivera and Officer Mills were the cops' names. And the reason I say that he was murdered is because when you watch the video, they claim that he was reaching for a gun. And they actually claim that he picked the gun up and that he pointed it. And the reality, when you watch that video, is completely different.
His hands
Right.
were empty.
Right.
He was pushing the gun away from himself. When he got out of the car, it was his gun. He owned it. But he basically threw it on the ground. And I think he thought, if he put it on the ground, then that would prevent the police from, panicking because he had a gun. And I also think during the course of that stop, he thought if he pushed it away from himself, that would make it even less likely that they would think he was trying to use the gun. And if you watch that video, it's not a situation where he was reaching for the gun and they just shot because they thought he was, he was, making a motion toward the gun and they shot because they thought he was reaching for it. He was pushing the gun away and had done that. And it was, maybe a half second after he had done that, and his hand was already back and basically above his head again when they shot.
Can I add to that also that one of the things that we do with Force Trajectory is we serve as media as first responders on these police shootings. And the reason why that's so important is because the narrative is completely controlled by the authorities, is completely controlled by the police. And so, I mean, in the case of Junior Lopez, there were 2 witnesses that saw him get shot. Those witnesses are Amber Bustillos, who's the fiance of Junior Lopez, and Kim Gonzalez, who's a friend of the couple. And what's not mentioned, what's considered secondary in, Fox 5 News or whatever news channel that you look at, is first of all, they released only information on what the police said was the narrative. They didn't have to do that. They could be responsible journalists and find out, 1, that there's witnesses, and then 2, interview witnesses before, and then, and of course interview the cops as well, but then come out with journalism pieces that have a more balanced perspective, which means that you're showing, interviews from people that were there that are not just police, but people that saw the actual shooting, the witnesses. And the Review Journal failed to do that. Pretty much every channel failed to do that. I know Fox 5 was out there a few days later during one of the candlelight vigils, and when I arrived, they were there to interview the witnesses, but I mean, it turned out to be like a 5-second clip, that they showed on the radio, and that totally changes it changes the power dynamic completely. It basically marginalizes the witnesses, which should never happen in a homicide. The witnesses, are the ones that they saw what happened. So whether or not you have a video, videos can be altered. One of the main things that Amber and Kim mentioned was that Junior didn't say, shoot me. He said, don't shoot me. And you can't hear that in the video. And then, because the video or the audio doesn't kick in until 30 seconds later, you're missing the entire exchange between Junior and the police in the very beginning, which is, first of all, why did that happen? How come their body cams weren't on at the moment that they stopped? That's actually protocol, right? They're supposed to turn on their cameras once they do the traffic stop. Correct. So why did they turn it on so much later? And then, Junior Lopez had an application with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. He wanted to become a police officer, so he was licensed to carry a gun, and he made that very clear. According to the witnesses, when he was being stopped, he exited the vehicle because they told him to exit the vehicle, and then he told them that I have a gun and I have a license to carry, and that's why he threw down the gun, because he wanted to show that he was surrendering his gun and that he didn't have a threat. So, that's completely kept out of all of the narratives in the mainstream local news, and that changes everything, because it goes from one community that becomes apathetic towards the case, and so then the family has no support to what could have happened, which is if the truth was actually told, then the community would be rallying behind this family.
Right. I mean, the Metro here and the news organizations do work hand in hand. The news organizations a lot of times are the mouthpiece of Metro. They parrot what Metro tells them is the narrative, and that's a real issue. We don't have actual news here.
Well, that's one of the things is, I wrote an article on Junior Lopez, and I didn't do it until about a week after Metro had their press conference. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to watch the video and see how I actually felt about it and like what my opinion of it was. And any of those reporters that watched that video should have been able to question Metro, or should have really been obligated to question Metro about, why does it look like he's pushing the gun away when you say he picked it up and pointed it? There's no ambiguity about that. He never picked up the gun. He never pointed it.
Exactly.
And they reported that as fact.
Right.
And at the press conference, the cop or the reporter said, "Oh, so do you think it was a suicide by cop?" Almost as if that was like a planted question to reinforce their narrative, instead of saying why did they fire their weapons when his hands were empty? You know what I mean?
It's the victim assassination. They
they
assassinate
did that
the
too.
character, and they do everything so people will side with the police on any issue. It's sad and sickening. I mean, we should have a press out here that's looking for the truth.
That's right.
And
Well, we're doing that, but yeah.
Well,
I think that's really good.
What we do is important, sure.
Well, I think that's great that you have your media team, and that's something that really like citizen media is something that's becoming bigger. But really, in the past, citizen media has been like a guy who's happened to be there with a cell phone.
Right.
And now we're getting to the point where we actually have our own media.
That's right.
And it's good because the media really is beholden to those in power and those who have the money. And it's becoming more and more so because right now there's 6 companies that own all the media in the entire United States.
Exactly.
And if your $1 billion sponsor doesn't want a story to go out, it doesn't go out.
That's right. That's why it's important for, so I have my Facebook Live on, and I just want to mention that Amber Bustillos, who's the fiance of Junior Lopez, she said, "Thank you guys for talking about this." It's important for concerned citizens to constantly share. Social media is a vehicle for change. It can be used as a weapon for truth, and we should use our platforms, all of them, to disseminate the truth. So someone like Amber, she should share this. All her friends should share it. Anybody that supports the Junior Lopez family should share. Anybody that supports families impacted by police violence, who wants to stop police brutality, should share this. And and that's what's going to compete against the mainstream. I mean, mainstream media is in crisis. That's not like unknown. That's a reality. They're in crisis. Print is going out. Part of that's digital, part of that's because of technology, but a large part of that is due to social media. And we have, for the first time as human beings in this millennium, have a chance to actually take hold of our own narrative, which is the reason for the power dynamic that exists today, is that we haven't had an opportunity to seize our own narratives because the authorities have always had control over it. So one thing that I wanted to mention was the Tashii Brown Farmer Brown, actually. March is coming up on Sunday, Mother's Day, and we have a flyer for it. We have a square flyer and we have like a longer flyer, and change that to your profile pic on Facebook if you're on Facebook. Show solidarity to the family, because when you stand, and all your personal friends see that you're standing up for something, they want to know more and they want to know why, and that's this conversation starter right there.
Yeah, and that's also part of the problem with the media is they report something and then it goes away. So you hear about it for maybe 3 or 4 days, and then you don't hear about it ever again. And whatever you do hear, like usually the first report is what somebody remembers.
Right.
Yep.
So that's why it's good that we have those differing opinions getting out there and the different perspectives and giving victims the opportunity and the surviving family members of those victims, if it's somebody who's been murdered.
That's right.
Give them the opportunity to tell their side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I think that helped Cop Block get big a lot in the beginning, is because we always had the submissions option where you could submit your own story and tell your side of it. And it's not like with the news where they get a press conference or a press release from the police and they print whatever the police say.
Right. I mean, it gives power back to the people. I mean, it's all power to the people, and this is one of the ways that we actually take back control. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful thing. I mean, we're living in an age now. Before, back in the day, people would be printing flyers, and we would be handing out flyers. Now we have so much more power. If we would just take that power and we seize it and use it, we can affect change.
Yeah,
we will affect change.
We need to harness the power of social media. It's like a brush fire, like a wildfire. You know, this stuff has the potential to go viral if people are willing to put in the work and share the event on Facebook, change your profile picture, harness these tools that we have available to us to really create change. Get your news from independent media. Don't rely on mainstream media, because then when these topics are brought up, if you're only watching mainstream media, when you're talking about it with your friends, you're repeating what they spoon-fed you, and you don't even realize it. So you want to have that alternate, viewpoint, the viewpoint that comes from the people.
And it gives, like, the average person, because you hear a lot, like, what can I do to make a difference? Not everybody wants to get out there and march or rally. Just by sharing information, sitting at home, creates, a dynamic that, like you said, spreads like wildfire. The more people that are aware, the more change we can affect.
Well, there's also the social media aspect of being able to question them, because when I put out the stories of the police abusing somebody, I always put in their Facebook profiles. I put in their Twitter accounts, their YouTube accounts, all that, and people can go there and question them. And even with the media, if the media doesn't cover a story right, you can go and ask that reporter, why didn't you ask him, why didn't you question why they said that there was a gun in somebody's hand when it wasn't there? So that's one of the things about the social media, is you can actually hold the police and even the media accountable for what they're doing on that level and put pressure on them to do the right thing.
I think also what I would like to see in the Las Vegas Valley is not so much like in terms of protest, but also just community meetings, where people are coming together to talk about issues that affect them. I think that's really important, because, these protests are great, but I've been to a couple of these protests and the turnout is kind of, it's not the best turnout. I know that for May Day we had the challenge of the rain and everything, and we did have a larger group there. I know that, it was discouraged by the rain. But I think if we came together as a community to talk about these issues, we could move together more strategically and kind of also unpack the layers. Because, police brutality, there's so many layers, you know what I mean? It's not something it's not a simple conversation. It's not a 5-minute conversation. It's more of like a very long thing to process. Every documentary I've seen of police brutality, no matter how specific they get, it's just really touching the surface of an issue that's been in our country for over 200 years. So we need to give perspective, and we can't really do that at a protest, because people are just, this is your message, this is your talking points, time limits, this and that. Okay, let's rally, let's chant. But I think as a community, we'd be a lot more productive in the education of a topic such as police brutality if we came together to just talk about it, off record even. It doesn't have to be, filmed or anything, but it's just to catch people up to what we've found out, what we've learned from people before us and movements before us. Every movement in this country has dealt with police brutality. There's not one movement, not one social movement that the police are not an obstacle, right? I mean, every single social movement has had to deal with the police. And people don't know that because they were fed the narrative that police are community leaders and they're supposed to serve and protect the public. And that's just largely false.
Well, it's repeated time and time again. I mean, it's the big lie theory, right? You repeat a lie often enough, protect it from criticism, it soon becomes the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think that's also why it's better to try to build community rather than just base it off of protests and that
That's long-term
sort of thing.
yeah.
Because the thing is that, first of all, you eliminate the need for the police or the desire to have the police come into your communities because you can rely on each other much more. And, you could set up a community policing that's not them just enforcing things against you, but actually protecting you and working for the benefit of the community. But it also has a support structure. So even if something happens, or even if it's not even police related and it's just something unfortunate that happens within the community, you have that support structure there where you can react to it and help that person, and you're not scrambling after the fact to try to seek revenge for something, or
Right, vigilantism.
Yeah.
Instead of calling the police, I mean, something simple that everybody should do is go out and talk to your neighbors, meet your neighbors, knock on their door. I mean, I know people that live next to somebody for 10 years, they don't even know their neighbor's name, Get out, talk to the people on your street, and, form some kind of way to communicate with one another if something's going on in the neighborhood, so that you don't have to rely on the police, because we see time and time again how when they get on scene, everybody's a suspect, and they're really good at escalating the situation instead of de-escalating the situation, and just form community and use each other's resources and lean on each other instead of leaning on the state, looking for, solutions from the state, because that is not the way to go.
That helps in so many different ways. I mean, a lot of the issues sometimes that when police arrive on a scene, it might be a mental health issue. The people in the community know the individual. They know their behaviors. They know, if there's a threat or no threat, if somebody's acting in an unusual way. The police come in and they don't concern themselves with whether this is kind of like a common thing or a normal thing. They perceive it as a threat and then escalate and use violence. Even after their training, I mean, they have their crisis intervention team, and yet they totally ignore their training anytime they come upon a scene, like that, and terrible things happen. So neighbors can take care of neighbors. One of the things I noticed, even when we're doing events, there's a lot of communities here, there's a lot of organizations that we can reach out to. I mean, it's not that we're like little islands here. So,
well, also one of the things about that, and people don't really realize it unless you're involved in really grassroots activism and things like Food Not Bombs, is the government really works to destroy community.
Right.
And they try to isolate people and not have that reliant structure because they want you dependent on them.
It's true.
And that's why they've cracked down on Food Not Bombs and those kind of things.
Well, just like so one of the things that my partner and I do is we work on, well, it's really him that works on earth ships, but they're basically these fully sustainable structures that where you're growing your own food, solar panel is your energy source, and you're catching your own rainwater and you're filtering your own water. So basically, you don't have to pay for groceries.
Love it.
You don't have to pay for your energy bill. You're completely off grid and self-sustaining. And the guy who created the Earthship, of course, he modeled off of Native Americans and how they built their structures. Michael Reynolds is his name. He's the architect. He literally lost his license for 10 years. And, he fought in court for his license for 10 years. And it was only because of the international recognition that he received for responding to disasters that they basically had to give him his license back. So, I mean, just to say, just to back up what you're saying about governments not wanting us to be independent, it's really true on all fronts. I mean, even to the point of like how we live in terms of like how we build our homes. They want us to be dependent on a structure because they make money off of it. I mean, corporations and government are like the same thing. They're one in one.
Well, what is a license? It's when the government takes away your freedom and sells it back to you, right?
Right.
So definitely, that's definitely what they do. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, I think also like, I know so many families whose their loved ones, they called 911 because they were having an issue, a domestic issue or a mental health issue, and their loved one ends up dead. I mean, I know way too many families with that being, and I know white families too. And people think that white folks are not impacted by police violence. It's a lie. And some people actually think that, like, that white folks don't get killed by police. They do. They get killed a lot by police, and the question is where's the community response for our white victims? That's the question that I have for white communities. It's like you're looking at, these issues as black problems, but this is a human rights issue that affects all of us. And if we don't respond to it, it's going to show up on our own doorstep. So it's really, really important for us to have these meetings to talk about protocol. If there is an emergency, who do we call? We don't call 911. We have to build a structure within the community that can respond to these emergencies. And it's going to take work. It's going to take sacrifice, but it is possible.
And the groundwork is being laid down. I guess it's California divesting in policing.
That's right.
There's a group of churches saying no matter what, we will not involve the police in any of our issues.
That's right.
Beautiful.
And
that's what needs to
that's
happen.
when communities take responsibility for their community, that people take responsibility for each other. Traditionally, that's how people operated until government, intervenes now in every breath you take.
Exactly. Yep.
So, that's one of the, it doesn't always happen, but it happens often enough that if you call the police, they make it worse. And even if it's not them killing somebody, you have somebody that has a mental health issue, and then they come out and they arrest them, and that's not helping their mental health.
Exactly.
So
and usually when they show up, somebody has to go to jail. That's I always hear it.
Yeah.
Well, somebody's got to go in.
And they're following their higher ups, which their interest is completely about the corporation, the private corporations of prisons, private prisons, because they have to, in order for them to justify, building these multi-billion-million-dollar structures to cage people, they have to arrest people. They have to fill in those cells because that's their reason. And of course for them, it's like, okay, well now we have created a bunch of correction officer positions, and now the community is flourishing because they're policing their own people, or communities from other places, and they're just getting shipped into this prison city. And I mean, who's making money off of that? It's just like war. Who's making money off of these wars?
Well, that's right. I mean, I don't know how many people are aware, but there's industries in prisons, and these are private companies. There's a furniture company that are paying incarcerated people, hostages to the system, to produce furniture, and then they go out and they sell its high-end furniture. So when you go into these high-end stores and buy high-end furniture, they're getting slave labor, and they're making all the profit, and it encourages them to keep people within the system, because if you don't have slaves making your stuff, then you don't have your product.
Another disgusting thing with private prisons, that whole industry, is they actually have a quota with the states that they operate within, that you need to fill this many beds or else we're going to charge you. So then that encourages the police to go out and make more arrests.
Exactly.
Whether it's a nonviolent crime or nonviolent drug crimes, it's time to end the drug war and really make a stand against private prisons, because this institution is just, it's self-defeating. It's working against our communities. It's not working for the people. And yeah, you're right, it creates some jobs, but in the end, is it worth it? And I definitely don't think it is. I always cringe when I see Victoria's Secret shops, because a lot of people don't know, but Victoria's Secret is deeply invested in prison labor, and more than likely those panties that you're buying for your loved one or whatever for Valentine's Day are
created sewn by prison hands, being paid 25 cents an hour or a day or whatever.
Yeah, by slave labor.
wage
Right.
is,
I mean, it hurts the whole economy. I mean, if they had to actually pay people, say even the minimum wage,
Mm-hmm.
Well,
they'd be putting
Exactly.
people to work.
But they don't want that because they wouldn't be making their profits.
That's
And
true.
Consumers
Yes.
have a lot of power when it comes
Exactly.
to this. So vote with your dollars the world that you want to see. Whether it's against Monsanto or Victoria's Secrets for doing this, Nestle, Starbucks,
Purina dog food.
there you
Yeah.
go.
One thing that we're working on is a boycott list, a state-sanctioned violence boycott list. And we do have a lot of corporations identified in terms of prison labor, but one that needs to be created and worked on is the police. It's like which corporations support the police. Even businesses, like if you see a sticker that says we support our local police, like we should go in there and have a conversation with those folks. Talk about Tashii Brown, talk about Junior Lopez, because it's, I think it's great that there's all these campaigns to get people to vote and to get registered to vote, but we vote every day with our dollar. Where do we spend our money? What corporations are taking, where do we shop? What corporations are taking our money? Where do we get our groceries? All of that. That's your largest power as an American, as somebody who lives in the States.
Absolutely. Boycotts are very effective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Starbucks just recently.
Yeah, I don't go to Starbucks.
Yeah, they caved almost immediately. They,
Yep.
They knew that if people stopped going, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well,
They
and
do
they've
listen.
they've had like 5 or 6 stories come out since then, and I don't know if it's just because they just started covering it or what, but like one of them was a graduation, I think it was South Carolina, where basically they came out and dragged black people off the stage, and not because they did anything, just they decided we don't want black people on the stage, like physically dragged them off the stage.
yeah, I saw the video of that.
And they've had a couple stores where there was one guy who had, I think he had a thing of Mentos or something, and a cop decided that he had stolen
An off-duty cop. I mean,
Yeah.
they carry their sidearms.
and he had bought it, and there was nobody complained that he didn't buy it. The store didn't tell him,
Right.
he's shoplifting. He just took it upon himself to decide this guy stole some candy.
Well, I mean, even if the officer believed that he stole, the first thing he did is he pulled out his service weapon. So potentially stealing Mentos could have been
Right.
a death sentence.
Well, that's the other thing is,
Like, what-
nobody should die for a $1 pack of
yeah,
Mentos.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's fucking
Even
ridiculous.
if you are shoplifting.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, boycott Starbucks, boycott Waffle House. Horrible.
I see.
Horrible. Where else? I don't go to Costco. Eric Scott was killed outside the Costco,
Right.
and Costco was largely responsible for
video.
escalating the situation.
and making the video
Definitely.
disappear.
Exactly.
video, that was-
Walmart. So many people. What's his name? John Crawford was killed in a Walmart. The recent killing in Barstow. I forget the young man's first name. Yarber, Deontay Yarber. He was killed in the parking lot of a Walmart. Don't go to Walmart.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, there was just another
that was
article
recently.
today
Yeah, I saw that.
where they had a cop working security and they thought the gentleman, I think, stole apples or tomatoes.
Yeah.
And the cop who was working security beat the guy and broke his leg. He just has a lawsuit going now.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch the video, it was horrifying over friggin' apples.
Right.
And the guy had a receipt. So it wasn't even like it was a theft of any kind. It was just a perception, that they thought they could, induce violence. I just don't understand it.
Well, and that's another huge issue is police working as security, because normally security, first of all, they can't detain you unless you are suspected of a felony. Like they can stop you and they can, try to. But
Anybody could ask
if you want to
anything.
leave, they can't physically detain you unless you've been suspected of a felony. But if they're police officers, then they have the policing powers and they can basically do whatever they want.
That's correct.
And they're often, they're more often than not, in fact, almost always, they're in police uniforms, so it's not even like security. And they're also, just on an economic level, the taxpayers are paying for that training, for their equipment, for all that, and then these private companies are utilizing all of that and
Right.
it's not. The taxpayers shouldn't be paying for that. The company should be paying for that.
Also, La Quinta. Boycott La Quinta. I love La Quinta. I used to stay there all the time, but Daniel Shaver was killed. You guys know about that case?
That was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was the young man. Basically, what happened was he was showing his friends what he used to kill roaches or something, and it looked like it's like a pellet. It's like a gun. But then somebody outside the La Quinta saw it and was like, "Oh my God, there's like a sniper or something." Called the police. The police go there and shoot him up with an AK-47 for no reason at all.
And
He's
that
on
was-
his knees crawling to them, following their
horrible.
orders.
Right, and that's in Arizona, where it's legal to walk down the street without any permits, and even concealed, it's
Right.
considered constitutional
So
carry.
even
which
if
means-
it was a rifle,
right, you can have
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
gun for any purpose,
Exactly.
as long as you're not actually threatening somebody. So the worst case scenario, they should have come up, and he obviously wasn't a threat, so he
Yeah.
wasn't. There was no reason whatsoever for them to do
Yeah.
basically anything.
And the cop got off too.
Yep.
He was fired, but there were no repercussions. And they took the father of 2 young girls.
Right.
And it's horrible.
And a lot of times, when these officers are fired or let go, they just don't disappear.
No, they get
They-
rehired by
At,
other police departments.
That's absolutely true. So
Yeah.
they're right back doing the same thing.
Exactly.
there needs to be some kind of blacklist where, like casinos out here have blacklists. You get kicked out of one casino, you can't go to another one. Or, police departments need to have that, because they'll do a background check, but these officers, even if they kill somebody, won't get criminal charges, so they have no criminal record. They were just fired, so they just, turn up at another police department. There was one guy I remember reading about, he killed 3 different people at 3 different police departments. So it's like, how many times does this have to happen before that type of, turns
I
into
don't think they're
legislation?
ever going to stop. They're well aware
Yeah.
of these cops' past history,
Right.
and it doesn't matter to them.
It's the Peace Officer Bill of Rights is what it is. That's what it's called. It's a legislation that protects the privacy and the record of police officers. So if you or I went on there and got a FOIA or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like I think we would actually have to take it to court or something in order to get the records released. That's largely the problem with police reform, is that how realistic is police reform? The first part of it is transparency. We have Las Vegas Metro doing, Coffee with a Cop, which is like a publicity stunt or whatever. And they're just basically trying to save face and make it look like they're interacting with community, when in truth they're not at all.
No.
And so how can we as a community come together? And people who kind of think that they have people that don't know anything about police brutality or police reform or policing period. They're just like, well, what are they saying about stuff? Well, have them come to the table. They won't. They refuse. They're like politicians. They refuse to come to the table to have an honest discussion about transparency, training, reform, any of that stuff. They refuse. So, what are we supposed to do as citizens? That's why I'm always about, community control of policing. We're paying their salaries, so why shouldn't we have community control over police reform and policing itself?
Right. Cop
least-
Block does. That's one of your options. You go out there and record. It's a local level. You do it in your community. But
Well,
there's no bigger way to push the issue.
And part of that is, first of all, if they're used to you interacting with them and holding them accountable, then they don't see that as a threat, or at least most of them don't. And when they're on camera, they're generally not going to do something that they know is bad or violent.
Most of the time.
That's
Right, Cap?
vast majority. Right?
That's okay. Yeah.
But the other thing is, as a citizen, it gets you used to interacting with the police. It eliminates a lot of that intimidation. When I first started going out and filming, you'd be nervous as you're holding the camera and this cop's confronting you, and they're generally giant and they're generally on steroids, so they're even, and they're armed, and the police have a history of violence, and so if somebody's confronting you and you know that they have predisposition for violence, even if you don't believe that all the police do, the one who's confronting you probably does. So
It seems that way.
the one that's angry that you're filming him probably has a predisposition for violence. So the thing about that is it helps you get used to facing that sort of aggression and being more calm and able to handle it. So when it's important that you do film, you don't, get nervous or scared.
It takes
So-
practice.
It does take
Yeah.
practice, and it's good. I mean, the life you save, by having film is a tremendous thing. I mean, I don't know how many times I've filmed and saw the cops like not escalate, even if they were escalating at the time. All of a sudden, they'll tell the guys. Especially, I do it a lot with the homeless because they're always jacking them up. Give me your ID. Well, make sure you go in. What did they say you did? Nothing. And more than one occasion, the police will be like, all right, get the fuck out of here. Just, get out. Just because somebody's there filming. And they're just, running ID checks to jack these guys up. And it's not, it's not a good thing for them to do. I mean, that gives the police this idea that they could come and do it all the time to people and not follow any sort of rules or regulations. This makes it more like what you would see like in the movies when they would, talk about Germany during the war, give me your papers.
Right.
Right.
And it's a scary situation.
times
You
we're
got
living in.
jackbooted,
Right.
thugs running around with state sanctioned, it's, I don't want to live in
And
that
that's
society.
the thing. If you're not the one being messed with by the cops, and you're the one, or if you are the one being messed with the cops, and there's somebody there filming, like that can bolster your it can make you feel better and not like you're like isolated and at the mercy of the police. So
Yeah, it helps with the accountability aspect. I mean, one of the largest hurdles that I've noticed when it comes to police accountability, especially with shootings, is that they investigate themselves, and it's a complete lack of transparency. Like you're saying, I mean, Metro even has a page dedicated to transparency. They're boasting about how we're so transparent.
it's a black page. It's all black.
very transparent. It's
It's just a blank
unbelievable.
page.
So I think it's important when we have these shootings, police officer involved shootings, there needs to be a third party investigative team or unit that is not funded by the police, so that they're not investigating themselves. Because I mean, that's like saying, oh well, I committed a crime, I'm going to investigate myself, and guess what, I didn't do anything wrong.
The problem with that, though, is that who would do that independent investigation? Because even when the Department of Justice sweeps in police departments has really done nothing in terms of performance.
I think it needs to be community based, kind of
Like
like
a
a
civilian
jury.
review board?
You
Yeah.
know what I
Well-
mean? Yeah, civilian review board.
Yeah, there's issues even with the civilian
Exactly.
rewards, because a lot of times, even here in Vegas, they had I think it was 9 out of 12 of them resigned when they had the guy who was shot in the leg because the cop thought that his hat was a gun. And basically one of the guys who resigned said they would get retired police officers and police officers' family and call them civilians. So the way it was here, it was
They
split.
stocked,
Infiltrators.
I think there was 18 total, and what they would do is it would be 6 cops and 6 civilians, but it was like the air.
So yeah, even
So-
with the civilian review board, there's transparency
And that
issues.
guy-
So
Yeah, and that guy even said like we would go in there and the police officers weren't interested in hearing anything. They just wanted to vote to approve the
Exactly.
shooting, and call
Yeah.
it justified.
rubber stamp.
Yeah.
Right through. Sure.
So I'm not sure where we are time wise, but we probably should talk about
Yeah,
the
let's do it.
vigil before it gets too late.
I have one of the flyers you printed up. I'll just read it real quick because it's short and to the point. This is the Families United for Justice press release for Justice for Tashii Brown, first year anniversary, Mother's Day vigil. So it's not a protest, it's a vigil. Bring a red rose or hibiscus flower if you can. So some brief history about what happened to Tashii Brown. On May 14, 2017, at the Venetian, Tashii Farmer Brown, 40, a Hawaiian native, was distressed and asked the police for help. Rather than providing him with assistance, LVMPD officer Kenneth LePera began to chase him and tased him 7 times before putting Tashii into an illegal chokehold. Despite a coworker's demand, and that this was actually his sergeant, told him to release him, LePera refused that order and took Tashii's life. The LVMPD stated that Tashii would not have been charged with any crimes had he survived this attack. While Officer LePera had been indicted for involuntary manslaughter and oppression under the color of office, The grand jury has continuously requested more time to decide whether or not the DA will prosecute. The mother, Trinita Farmer, is calling the community to support her this Mother's Day by showing up and demanding justice for her beloved son, a father of 2 young children. She has also extended her invitation to other victims of police violence, and we will have other mothers present to share their stories and demand justice for their loved ones. So yeah, definitely come out, join us. It's at the Bellagio Fountains at 3 p.m. this Sunday.
More than likely, we'll be providing flowers and also photos of different victims in the Las Vegas Valley, and probably also Nathaniel Pickett as well. And it's going to be a very powerfully visual vigil. And, you know, we have several speakers lined up to speak about the issue, and then also several mothers and family members who will be also speaking about the struggle that they're facing after their loved one was killed. So really, really important for the community to come out and support. You know, like I said before, you don't want this kind of violence to happen to you. And, you know, that's the reason why I do this work, is because I see what's happening. I've been seeing what's happening. I connect with other people who see what's happening. And we have to continue to spread the message, because you know, every family member, not every, but many family members that I meet, they're just like, wow, I had no idea until it happened to me. You know, please, like, let's let everybody know, because, you know, nobody wants to suffer the pain and experience the pain it's lifelong, you know, it's a lifelong trauma, long-term trauma, you know, and it's very, very sad.
We want to make this an example of the power that the people have. You know, the news is going to be out there. If they see the community come together and rally behind this family, and then maybe these charges will stick, you know, because it's in front of a grand jury right now. The next set date, I believe, is May 24th, and it's all done behind closed doors. But if they see that the community is fed up with this and are rallying behind this case in particular, hopefully, you know, he'll go to prison.
They have to answer to the people. I mean, we you know, definitely we deserve justice in this, and the family deserves justice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that grand jury actually has the power to just absolve him and drop that.
Exactly.
And they've delayed it twice now.
Right.
So
it seems like that's where they're heading, right? Like I would not be surprised if that's what happened, if they completely, you know, drop the charges again.
So it's good to have pressure on that to make to have some incentive for them not to do that.
It's not going to go away. I mean, people are not going to forget.
And the other thing about that, the victims' families, first of all, I mean, it's bad for anybody to have their children or their family members murdered, but when it's a police officer, and on top of that, you know, or at least, you know, there's been no opportunity to get any kind of justice out of that because of the fact that it's a police officer. And then on top of that, your family member is demonized and treated like a bad person and has this reputation as being a horrible person.
And your family, too.
So, family, I mean, it's really important that we support the family members.
Absolutely.
People don't realize that families impacted by police violence are not eligible for victims of crime compensation. So if a civilian were to have killed their loved one, they would be privy to $10,000 to $100,000 from the state to support them, victims of crime. That's what they, you know, every week in April, there's a week in April where, you know, police departments all over the country celebrate Victims Crime Week. And what they do is, you know, they celebrate being police officers and all the great work they're doing and all the great support that they're providing for victims of crime. But, you know, largely missing in that is, and purposefully missing in that, are families impacted by police violence. A few years ago, the California families, including Uncle Bobby, the uncle of Oscar Grant, he organized with other California families to participate and just show up at these victim of crime events. And they were so startled by them showing up that they got kicked out, you know, because they were just like, no, this is not the publicity stunt we wanted to have, you know. But that people don't realize that. I know families who haven't been able to purchase a tombstone for their loved one. That's how bad it is. You know what I'm saying? And like, that's horrible. And families, they lose their jobs. You know, I have a family member I know who's actually watching right now, Yolanda McNair. She's the mother of Adacia Miller, who was killed by Detroit police. she had a government job as well, and she ended up losing her job. Like, why did she lose her job? Well, because she's looked at as a conflict of interest, because she's advocating for her daughter who was killed by the police. And so families lose their jobs, they lose their income, they can't pay for these crazy burial fees, and a lot of them end up suffering from PTSD. Probably every family member I've met suffers from PTSD.
I can't imagine how you wouldn't.
Yeah, and they're also disproportionately poor people, so that makes it harder. You can't even bury your loved one or bury them properly.
Right.
Well,
Rhonda Gibson was homeless. I mean, she had people that took care of her and took her in, so she wasn't actually homeless, but she lost the house that she lived in. She basically had no income after Stanley Gibson was murdered, because they were living off of his veterans benefits, which they had already lowered
Dropped.
so much that they were pretty close to that point anyway. But she had really nothing to turn to. She, like you said, she could not get victims assistance, which normally would help her.
Right. And the other end of that is the police officers who commit these crimes get a ton of support.
Oh yeah.
They
Well, in this
get-
case,
It's crazy.
This case in particular,
And I'll show you. I mean, I have screenshots of the support that came out for this murderer, and people donating money. The family was trying to get enough money to
Which
support a funeral.
Violates the terms of service for GoFundMe anyway.
Right.
Not allowed to collect money for legal fees.
I mean, there's a lot more to this. The thin blue line,
Right.
may stretch but never breaks. And no matter what they do, the police, they're going to be supported by their friends and families and coworkers and the police union.
Yeah, in Tashii's case in particular, the police union, they created a GoFundMe for Officer LaPera, the murderer. Created a GoFundMe for him. They raised over $40,000 for him. Meanwhile, Trinita
victim.
Farmers created I don't know if she created it, but there was one created to help with the funeral expenses, and they raised a few $1,000s.
And also they've David Roger, who was the district attorney before Wolfson, and protected the police in that capacity, quit the district attorney's office to go officially work for the police union. And he's representing LaPera now, and the union is paying for it. So on top of that, they pay for their legal fees.
Right. So, they never suffer at all. I mean, they never feel the sting of what they did.
No.
Essentially, they're above.
They're above the law.
They are above the law, and we are trying to change that. I mean,
The police unions are really, really powerful, and they have a lot of money. I mean, the 5 officers that killed Kenny Lazo back in 2008, April 12th, 2008, in Long Island, Suffolk County, Long Island, they were detectives, and they were making 6 digits. One of them was like the lead in the police union, in the local police union. So there's just no way that those cops are ever going to be held accountable criminally. And we found out years later that in the grand jury, they didn't even show the autopsy report. So this whole grand jury proceeding thing also needs to be revisited. I mean, our entire court system. So police brutality, which is a symptom of the system, of the capitalist system that puts, profits over people at all costs, is the issue. And, we have to look at these systems and how they work with each other. And it's there. I mean, police corruption, harassment, intimidation, it's so blatant. The officer, Richard Hasty, who killed Ramarley Graham back in 2012, he was laughing and smiling throughout the court case. I mean, so disrespectful, to the family, and he broke a law too, because he broke into, without a warrant, he broke into Ramarley's home and killed him in front of his grandmother and his younger brother. So we're talking about criminal cops. We're not talking about, I'm sure some cases are like, oh, the cop was nervous and he shot. Okay, that happens. Obviously these cops are hypervigilant, and they're trained to be hypervigilant, and they're super nervous. I mean, that's a huge part of it. But there's no doubt in my mind that some of these cops are also just itching to kill, because that there are, look at our society. I mean, it's so violent, and it's founded upon racism and genocide, and it's never been dealt with. And because it's never been dealt with, this is how we're living now, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they make it easy. You know, they remove the police officers from the community. There's no interaction. They don't know the people.
And that's on purpose, too.
Right. It's so that when you have to go in and shoot, you know, there's no conscience. There's no moral. There's a police war against the people. And, you know, it's what they've been building up to.
But that also used to be one of the ways that they would like beg off responsibility for the police, is they would be like, well, no officer wakes up in the morning wanting to kill somebody. And first of all, that doesn't absolve you from killing somebody if you get mad and decide to kill somebody. If it's a split-second decision or whatever, you still murdered somebody. But the other thing about that is I'm not so sure that's the case. In fact, I'm convinced that's not the case. I think there are a good percentage of police officers that do wake up wanting to kill somebody.
No, there was that where they got tattoos, wasn't it?
Well, there's been several cases where there's been police that had like a special tattoo or some sort of special, like, trophy for murdering somebody.
Right. So you'd want to,
which is what a lot of gangs do.
So, yeah.
You know?
Well, there's a book called and I just got it. It's called The Police Handbook, and it's red cover. It's written by 2 PhDs, one from New Mexico, and then I can't remember the other professor. But basically, in it, you know, they're talking about how the NRA funds these like tournaments, these shooting tournaments, and the goal is to, one, shoot as many people dead as possible, and then two, have as much fun as possible. And so these officers who are being trained, they're trained to kill, and they're trained to enjoy killing. And that's something that people don't realize. And that's why they're so desensitized and dehumanized, and that's why they're so trigger happy and just so like violent. You know, I remember I was on a bus from New York to Greensboro when I was living on the East Coast. We had these Chinatown buses that were crazy cheap, you know, like $40 to travel to one state to the other. And, you know, because we were largely a people of color bus, you know, Chinatown bus filled with black and brown folks, the police in Durham, North Carolina would stop us, and they would literally go through our bags, you know, which is not legal. Like you have a right to say, no, I don't want to be searched, you know, search and seizure. And this one time this cop came up and, you know, I started filming him, and, you know, he started questioning me, and he was, I forget what he said, like saying that I was a threat. And I was just like, dude, you're the only person here that's armed. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're the one that's armed. Like, you're armed to the teeth. Right? It's like, how are we posing as any threat, you know? And if this was a bus filled with, you know, white executives, I seriously doubt you would be pulling us over right now, you know? But, you know, it's so important to know your rights. And it's also important to understand the issue of policing, not just nationally, but internationally. Part of the reason what I really enjoy about this discussion is Kelly bringing up the fact that, you know, actually, I think some of these cops do want to kill people, and they are violent. They have a tendency towards violence, and we can look at that from a systemic perspective through looking at why is there an NYPD headquarters in Israel? You know, why is Ray Kelly, the ex-commissioner of NYPD, why was he shipped to Haiti and to Israel? What was he doing there? Well, he was training the police to learn how to police their own people in the brutal way that NYPD polices New Yorkers, you know? So, I mean, that's pretty scary. You know, look at CIA, School of the Americas. I mean, these are things that we have to look at and unpack as a society if we really want to understand policing in America and what that means, not just for ourselves, but what that means across borders.
I wanted to talk about the RJ article about the sergeant. His name was Sergeant Crumrine. He was the one who told Officer LaPera, you know, let go of Tashii. He was later demoted for failing to intervene by not ensuring that LaPera let go of Brown after he gave him, you know, a direct order to do so. In the body cam footage, you can actually hear him say, hey, let go of him, Ken. And Officer LaPera's like, "Are you sure?" and choked him for another minute. Like, had the sergeant stepped in, that was a crucial minute. He possibly could have saved Tashii's life. So he was demoted for that inaction, and he took that personally and he's suing LVMPD for that. He's saying he wants his job back with back pay. And in his complaint, he alleges that the hold that LaPera used was a department-approved chokehold, which Lombardo has gone up and, did a press conference saying it was an unapproved chokehold. And then he even boasted, like, hey, it's not like I didn't do anything. I handcuffed him once he let go of him, So you handcuffed his dead body, and that's your defense, you know what I mean? It's unbelievable to me, really.
Yeah, that just brings up the one cop, the cop of color who killed Sean Bell, and he was the only one that got fired from NYPD, and again, the same situation, just all up in arms, calling racism and everything, because he was fired. And it's just like, okay, if this was a civilian situation, you'd be lucky if you were, not locked up, for being an accomplice to murder. So,
yeah, he also, in the complaint, that he was claiming that what was the complaint? He was saying that he was being singled out.
Oh yeah, because this case in particular got so much media attention that he was being discriminated against because other people do the same thing and then nothing happened to them. Why are you targeting me? Is it because this case got so much negative media attention?
He's basically saying I'm not the only guy that allowed cops to murder somebody.
Right.
You're just picking on me because
right. Exactly. Yeah, and some of that actually might be true, because, the white supremacist construct does also operate in those bureaucracies, So it's like, was the Sean Bell, guy that, the cop that killed him, who happened to be brown, was he targeted because he was brown? Probably. You know what I mean? Like, it still rings true, Yeah,
there are a lot of times. I know Gail Sacco brings this up a lot, and she's right. You notice a lot of times the cops that are disciplined are people of color, and
right.
And there's other things where, like, when they come screaming up to a crime scene, and you have undercover cops there, and some of them are black or brown people, or people of color of some sort. The cops will jump on them. They'll jump on another cop.
They've
murdered.
It's
a black guy.
Cops.
Yeah.
Undercover cops who are black in New York in the subway.
And in fact, there was a story. It was within a store where there's off-duty, or it was a retired cop actually, and he was a black guy. And basically, the cops showed up, and I think they had a report of somebody shoplifting, and this was in New York, and they showed up and just beat the crap out of this guy and basically gave him the civilian treatment, and he was like, oh, I can't believe it, I used to be one of them. And it's like when they realize you're not one of them anymore, and you really probably never were.
Hey, we've come to our time. It's time to say goodbye to everybody and thank Happy Earth Market and Nathan for doing such a wonderful job of running the boards for us. And now you have a really great podcast coming up.
Immediately following this one, we have Nina Brown, who's been an activist since the 60s with everything from the Black Panthers to the gay rights to the women's movement.
Awesome.
Amazing.
So we're going to sit down with her and put her whole life story.
Fantastic.
So,
that's going to be a long podcast.
Can we hold up one of these flyers?
Yeah. We'll hold. We have a poster here. If somebody wants to do it, if anybody has any more closing.
Yeah, well,
when I repost it, I'll put an image of it in there so that you can actually see it. So
I gotta give it up to Trinita Farmer. They're filing a new lawsuit against LVMPD for violating Tashii's constitutional rights. There was a duty to intervene, so she's suing for the loss of her relationship with her son. And that's the thing that pisses me off is the families need some sort of compensation, but it doesn't come out of the cops' pockets. It comes from taxpayers that have to pay it. So it's like the community gets hit twice.
Yeah.
And I want to say we need to have like some kind of police insurance where they have to carry their own insurance so that
Exactly.
they have to pay out of pocket. That would really
That's-
deter some of this behavior.
That's interesting because one of the last year at the National Network Gathering for Families United for Justice, Andrew Joseph, the father of Andrew Joseph the third, mentioned that he was like, I think police should have insurance. Like if they take someone's life, it should come out of their own
Exactly.
policy. And I agree. I think police departments should be the ones that are responsible for paying the victims. And if we did that, then they would actually these killings would cause them to be bankrupt. And would really make them think twice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey,
So the vigil is May 13th, which is next Sunday at 3 p.m. in front of the Bellagio where the fountains are.
Please come, show up, bring friends.
And Force Trajectory Project and Families United for Justice are linked within tags within the event invite for this.
Mm-hmm.
Also, forcetrajectory.com is the website, and fu4j.org is the website for Families United for Justice.
Sorry, it's actually fu4jnetwork.org.
Oh,
Sorry
okay.
about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Peace.